right, Shabbat Shalom, happy Sabbath, good evening. I'll be right on the screen with you in a moment. All right, brethren, welcome to the Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study for the 11th day of the third month. On God's holy sacred calendar, it is the 22nd day of May, 2021, on your pagan Roman calendar. Now, I should make a statement here. I said it's the 11th day of the third month on God's holy sacred calendar, on the Hebrew calendar. It's now the 11th if it's after sundown today on Friday, wherever you are. And it'll stay the 11th in the morning, because God runs the days from sunset to sunset. And I know I have some new people tuned in tonight. There's some of you that we're going to tune in who you just made friends with me on Facebook. And I don't know if you knew I was a preacher or not, but you're certainly finding out as you tune in live on this channel. And we keep the weekly Sabbath, God's Sabbath, as the Bible describes the Sabbath, as being the seventh day of the week. And since the time of creation, that day of the week has not changed. Now, if you have been, or if you are a member of the Roman Catholic Church, if you check the Roman Catholic Library, if you go to the Vatican down in the basement, those big libraries they have down there, they will have a copy of the full-page newspaper ad that Roman Catholic Cardinal Gibbons, what was Gibbons' first name? Well, I forget his first name, but Cardinal Gibbons ran a full-page ad in the New York Times over 100 years ago. And in it, he was intending to, what's the best way to say this? To give a left-handed congratulations or a left-handed compliment to the Protestants as he chided them about their keeping of Sunday as the Lord's Day. Cardinal Gibbons said to them, you people think you've protested from us? No, you are our daughters. You are following us. And he went on to get specific. He said, you can check the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, from the beginning to the end, and you won't find one single verse of Scripture that condones or sanctions or instructs the keeping of a worship day on the first day of the week. He said, when you check the Bible, you'll see that it tells you the Sabbath day is the seventh day of the week, and that hasn't changed since creation. The first day through the seventh day is what on the Roman calendar we call Sunday through Saturday, Saturday being the seventh day. Even on the Roman calendar, they've attempted to change that a few times, but it never really caught on. Some people print up the week as ending on Sunday and the new week beginning on Monday, but it's always still defined as the first day of the week is Sunday. And the Cardinal Gibbons, he told him, he said, you are keeping Sunday because he was bragging about it a little bit. He said, we, the Catholic Church, we changed it in the 4th century with the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Laodicea. We changed the worship day for the Christian world from, and you know, the early Christian world, the first Christians were those since the New Testament church began on on Pentecost, AD 31. Now, we just celebrated Pentecost, as it should correctly be counted, last Sunday. Now, as I say that, you know, my audience, you know, I know I have a few Catholics watching tonight, so I wanted to give you guys kind of the left-handed compliment back that you gave the Protestants. Now, I'm not Protestant. I grew up Protestant, but God called me out of that. And I now keep God's Sabbath day on the seventh day of the week, which the Catholic Church acknowledges is the seventh day, is the Sabbath. And they said, you Protestant people are keeping Sunday because of us, the Catholic Church. We changed it. And you're still following us, even though you claim you want to protest against us, as, you know, that history. Martin Luther, etc. But my audience, I was about to mention, beside having some quote-unquote good Catholics in our audience tonight, we've got people who grew up in the Springtime Harvest Church, the church of the sixth era, as Revelation defines it, the Philadelphia era of the church. People grew up in that era of the church and learned about keeping of the holy days, the annual holy days I'm talking about. In addition to the weekly Sabbath, we keep the annual Sabbaths. And then we had a real test with this feast that has just occurred, that some people are keeping tomorrow night, some that are keeping this coming Sunday. They're going to be keeping Pentecost. And some of those are potentially in my audience tonight because, as I saw a note that went out telling people in a certain group what time they would be meeting for Pentecost this coming Sunday, I said, well, okay. I asked them why they were doing that. And so they may tune in tonight to see what I'm going to say. So, and I'm hoping this can be a light, lovely Sabbath. We have had in the news, if you've been following the news has been enough to hopefully drive you very much to your knees. Now, things, for the moment, with a ceasefire in Israel, have settled down over there, quote-unquote settled down. Although Mr. Netanyahu, having been forced into that in large part because of the current administration, the current Biden administration in the United States government, really putting pressure on him to cease fire, he wanted to destroy all of the war-making facilities of Hamas, which, carnally speaking, is a blasted good idea. Take the weaponry away from your enemy. And it's not a secret at all. It's well known. Iran, those weapons have come from Iran, and Iran is backing them. But see, that's a big part of the problem now with a change of government. We had a government administration in the United States that was really backing up and supporting Israel and recognized the potential dangers, nuclear war-wise, that could come out of Iran, and had taken steps to recognize the truth about Iran. I mean, Iran put the truth out on television publicly when they had a former advisor to a former president come on Lebanese television and state, now in the Arabic language, but we had English language translators translate every word. I have played that a half dozen times. I think, except for some of my stuff was stolen. For a long time, I still had that video, and I played that thing for a couple of years after that advisor to a former president got on television publicly and stated how they tricked all the nations that participated in that Iranian deal, and how they had succeeded and that they had not revealed all of the nuclear stuff they had. They only reported some they had to a certain level. They said, he's telling this on television publicly, that they really have some Iranian nuclear stuff at a higher level already developed that they didn't tell him about. He's bragging about that, and there's a female host who's sitting over there laughing as her guest, the advisor to a former Iranian president, is revealing these facts right after the quote-unquote Iranian deal that was made, what's that been, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago? I need to look up the exact date, but anyway, we're at a certain respite with that tonight, and yet, at the same time, there's something that's in some ways significantly worse on the horizon as Russia lines up its troops along the Iranian terrain boundary line, near the Iranian boundary. And that has caused some great alarm. Even the general in charge of NATO got on and said, we haven't kept up our nuclear stuff enough to really be a significant threat to Russia the way Russia has excelled its stuff. And this is the week when the president of Russia, Putin, gave his address to the nation, and he is speaking out without fear against the United States. Of course, he began doing that a few years ago when he announced that Russia had developed stealth missiles that had the ability, and they showed a map that appeared to be the shape of Florida, and these missiles flying in, and he said, we have these things fly in such a way that no present nor future missile defense system can take these missiles out of the air before they hit their target. And he said they have nuclear warheads on them that can destroy entire cities, and that they had 130 of them aimed at 130 American cities, and more aimed at every strategic major military command post in the United States. This is the president of Russia, Putin, announcing this at the address to the nation in 2019. And we have that video. And on the heels of that, or just before that, the Chancellor of Germany, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, screams with alarm in January of 2019 as the United Kingdom was still negotiating or discussing in their parliament, fighting in their parliament, about a delay or not a delay, or approving Theresa May's deal that she had cut with the EU without having gotten advance agreement from her UK Parliament, who turned it down 3 times in a row. And it extremely frustrated the German Chancellor, such that she screamed out as if a prophet, raising his voice like God commands the prophets to do, to cry aloud and spare not. German Chancellor Angela Merkel cried out, "You people better look into the abyss!" As she expressed her anger about being dilly-dallied around with the Brexit deal she thought she had cut with Theresa May. And I nearly fell out of my chair when I heard those words. You better look into the abyss. As I've said before on this program, Mrs. Merkel, that's Bible language you're using. You're using the original Greek word used in the original text of Revelation 17, verse 8, that says there, she said, you people better look into the abyss. What's in the abyss? She knows there is what the Bible calls a beast in that abyss. Let me tell you where we're going. I'll tell you a little bit more of that in a moment. We've got a telecast by God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong tonight. That relates very much to what's happened this week. He's going to mention things about Israel that we should take note of and be aware of, and realize that the little nation-state today called Israel, you're going to hear God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, the apostle Herbert, you're going to hear him say that what's called Israel today really is not Israel at all. The house of Israel did not consist of Judah or half the tribe of Benjamin and Levi. That was the house of Judah. At one time, the two nations, the two houses, when they split, you'll see that on the screen with a map in a moment, the southern part, which headquartered out of Jerusalem, was called Judah. The 10 tribes that under Jeroboam went up to Samaria were called Israel, the house of Israel. Israel are your lost 10 tribes who were lost but are lost no more. And Mr. Armstrong's going to make reference to that. We're going to bring up some scriptures, I'll just tell you in advance, from Genesis 49, and a graphic that I hope, Dane, you and Jacob were able to print that out okay the other day. If you're not, I've got a recipe I'm supposed to send out to you. That I've been printing those out. I've got some envelopes even that have little windows in them, so after I print out the receipts for the Holy Day offerings, I can just fold it in a third, stick it in a window envelope, put a stamp on it, boom, it's off to you. I'm gonna, if you weren't able to print that chart that I'd emailed to you that you wanted to have, I'm going to print one out for you and stick it in there with your Holy Day receipt. Okay, here in the office we call those recipes, but you know they're really receipts. And I'm going to show that graphic tonight that shows where the lost 10 tribes, where all 12 tribes are today. We're also going to talk about where is what was called the Worldwide Church of God. Where is God's true church today? Mr. Armstrong, at the end of this telecast, is going to offer a booklet by that title. And we're going to talk about it after he offers that book, because when he wrote that book, of course, before he died, things have happened to what was one well-organized body that has not only become extremely scattered, but it, unfortunately, unpleasing to God, has become divided. We'll talk about that later, but I said I'd mention just a little bit more about what German Chancellor Angela Merkel got so excited about. You people better look into the abyss! Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Merkel. As I pull myself up off the floor, remembering how I nearly fell out of my seat when I heard her say that in January 2019. Oh, boy, are we not doing our job, Father? You've got the leader of a country telling everybody, the world, that they'd better be looking at Revelation 17, verse 8 and verse 10. They better be looking into the abyss. The King James Version of the Bible, many other versions of the Bible, render abyss as the bottomless pit. And either way you call it, you better look in there. The Bible says there is a beast in there, which is a system of government that has at the top of it, its top leader is an emperor, a world-ruling emperor. And verse 8 says, the beast that was. Now, what in the world does God mean by the beast that was? And then he says, and is not, and yet is. Well, it's kind of like, when you first read that, well, God, would you please make up your mind? The beast was, and is not, and yet is? What are you saying here? Well, when you understand it, when those inspired understand it, God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong was given, his mind was open by God to understand that as God's servant from the Father through Christ, through Herbert Armstrong. Things that the early apostles and the prophets going back to Daniel and even the early apostle John, who wrote from the Isle of Patmos in AD 90, they would have given their right arm, their left tule, their right arm, whatever, to have understood what we know today because of what God revealed from the Father through Christ, through their servant, Revelation 1:1 style, Herbert Armstrong, to us. That's how we know who God's servants are. He revealed to us who the sixth king of the seven kings in verse 10 of Revelation 17, through God's end-time apostle Herbert. God revealed to us this information, this understanding of Revelation 17, verse 8, about the beast in the abyss that Mrs. Merkel is screaming about. She knows and understands who that beast is. She understands how it ascended out of the abyss. Her father was a evangelical minister in East Germany where she grew up. So she had her nose from the time she was a little child much in the Bible. And when you're living over there where the beast was operating, you can have, and God probably inspired some understanding, so she could speak out as she did. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Mrs. Merkel, for that. and we can somewhat expound on that. Let's go just a little further. Then we're going to God's end-time Apostle Herbert to a telecast he gave in 1984 on the United States and the British Commonwealth, the UK today, United Kingdom, in prophecy, where he's going to talk about Israel and how that's going to relate to what happened over there this week. And he's going to talk about things that relate to, and I do have somewhere amid my things, and by morning I hope to find the recording where Mr. Armstrong spoke about Russia in prophecy. Now, just because those of you who know the answer already, will Russia attack the United States? Well, they could do some bombing and rough us up, but they won't do the destruction of Ezekiel 6:6. However, the missiles they have created may be the ones used by this beast of verse 8 of Revelation 17 to do the damage. God prophesied through Ezekiel would happen to all of the cities of the United States, and you people in the UK, don't laugh at us, because that prophecy includes you, the two sons of Joseph, the birthright recipients of the promises God handed down from Abraham through Isaac. Excuse me, those of you of the Islamic religion who claim that Abraham took Ishmael up on the mountain. Buzz! You know, that's put in this book written circa 600 A.D. that some who used to work in the Vatican's basement library, secret vault library, which the Apostle Herbert has been into, by the way. He was given permission and a pass to go down there and look at books and read things, as long as he didn't take any of them out of that conclave, which he did not. But he was able to go down there and read and see what they had. Some who worked, of course, I don't think they gave him access to everything. They didn't give him access to what this Jesuit priest had access to that has been killed off, interestingly, I mean, sadly, but interestingly, after he made a video, after he came out and said, you can fire me or you can dismiss me from the Jesuit order. And I know I gave a vow not to openly discuss certain things, but when it's as egregious as what he learned, he said, I can't keep silent. It's better for people that I speak up and break that vow to what he considered an evil organization, rather than keep a lid on the fact that, and one of you sent me a video to speaking by a rabbi in Israel, who is a friend of mine, by the way, who I know personally, who asked me, Stephen, would you help me get former Chief Justice Roy Moore to speak on my public radio program? This certain rabbi used to do a radio program in Israel on Israeli public radio. After he knew that at a public radio station where I was working, not a public, but a regular broadcast station where I was working, and I would have to fill in when the regular talk show host on a call-in show didn't show up, I lined up Roy Moore to be my guest on that one-hour talk show program one day. And the rabbi in Israel heard my program. And because, online you could get it, he heard about it, said, hey, Stephen, would you help me get that man you had on your program, former Chief Justice Roy Moore? He was impressed that Roy Moore had held firm and was taken out of office because he refused to remove the Ten Commandment plaques that he had put in the lobby of the Alabama Supreme Court, where he was Chief Justice. And so I helped him. I helped him. I put the two of them together, and Mr. Moore appeared, former Chief Justice Roy Moore, appeared on the rabbi's public radio program. And I was the facilitator to help him do that. So I know the man you sent the video of, who was asked a question, and I don't think it was fair. He wasn't told the question in advance. So he didn't have time to do any research, and he starts answering it. He was asked, He was, first of all, I guess, given the comment that some people have put videos out on YouTube and elsewhere that reveal how the Catholic Church helped finance the writing of and helped do the writing of the Quran, and how they financed the 4 generals of Muhammad who went to Israel and killed Jews and killed Christians, Sabbath-keeping type Christians in Israel, way back in the 1600 circa time period, A.D. And there was the Jesuit priest who released the first video on this, revealed that the Vatican had funding, people who were funding through the Vatican, money they were giving to the generals, the army generals of Muhammad, to go over there and do this killing of the Jews and Christians. And the deal was, we'll give you all this money, help you do this, help you create this book that'll get everybody following you, Muhammad, and your generals into war. And we'll really accent the good of war as this book holds out. And when you've driven all the Jews and Christians out of Jerusalem, then you give us the Temple Mount area where the Pope then wanted to move, the Vatican. But guess what happened? Those generals were so successful that they said, hey, after all this great success, we got this. This is a holy land of the Bible and our Quran. We're going to add verses to make it one of our holy areas. And in our Quran, we're claiming in the Quran, this is one reason those of you who try to support the Quran should say, buzz, thumbs down, because it's in great contradiction to God's Word. God's Word tells us Abraham took Isaac up to the mountain as a test to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And God then said, no, Abraham, now I know you will obey. Take this ram in the bush, and I won't have to resurrect Isaac, through whom I made the promise of offspring so numerous you couldn't count them. They'll be as countless as the stars of the heaven or the grains of sand on the seashore. But the Quran fabricates this to say Abraham took his son born to Sarah's handmaid Hagar, Ishmael, up to the mountain to slay him, and that God gave this promise of greatness of nations, etc., and land and possession of land to Ishmael's descendants. Now, God did, after Sarah told Abraham, hey, this woman's driving us crazy here. You got to get her out of the camp. She's treating me like dirt with her older son Ishmael over Isaac. What was it, some 14, 19 years older? Some big difference. The time that God made wait from the time Hagar bore Ishmael till he finally came back and said, no, look, the deal I made with you is that Sarah would have a child, and she's going to have a child. I was born a dozen years later. It's in the Bible. You can look it up. But friction arose between Hagar and Sarah complained to Abraham. Abraham went to God. God said, listen to your wife. Your wife says that woman goes, and her son, out of the camp. And on the way out, the second time, they had this, they were starving. They were no water to drink. And God comes along, brings some angels, opens up a well, and tells Hagar that her son Ishmael is going to be blessed, and God's going to make a great nation of him with 12 chiefdoms, 12 dukes, but that they would fight among themselves. There'd be trouble to their own brethren, their own blood brethren, and also to their half-blood brethren, to their step-brother. Which way do you call that? Step, or there may be another term for it. Because Abraham was the father of Ishmael through Hagar, via Hagar, Sarah's handmaid. And Abraham was the father, of course, of Isaac through his legitimate wife, Sarah. And it was Isaac who Abraham took up to the mountain, not, as the Quran says, Ishmael. That's a blatant lie. All right? So, now listen. If we get cut off from some of these places we're on because I tell the truth, and it contradicts what other people are saying, only one thing is the truth. Either the Bible is true or the Quran is true. One or the other, and the other one's lying. Now, I will, to their credit, say the Quran has some things in there that are true, but it's just like the two trees in the Garden of Eden. There was the tree of life, there's the tree of death. Now, was the tree of death totally evil? No, only the consequences of it were totally evil, taking a person to death. But it's called the tree of the knowledge of good, and evil. Both on that tree. Now, the good is on there, just like on a counterfeit dollar bill or $20 bill or $100 bill. Now, this is not a counterfeit bill, but at least as far as I know, it's not. I got it from a grocery store, I think. But anyway, if it were a counterfeit dollar bill, the average person would not be able to tell. Why? Because everything on it looks like the real thing. I mean, it says in God we trust. It's got serial number on it. It's got a picture of old George on the $1 bill. And, you know, all the other stuff a real dollar bill would have on it. But if it were counterfeit, it would not be genuine. You could wind up in jail for a number of years for passing around counterfeit money if it were counterfeit, even though it looks like the real thing. So there's good on that tree of good and evil so that you think that tree is genuine, a tree to follow. But its conclusions are evil, just like a counterfeit dollar bill. It's not the real thing. And so you wind up with death instead of life. But it looked good. I mean, it looked like the real thing. And the Quran's got some stuff in there to make it look like the real thing, to sound good to people. Oh, yeah, that's good that you love your brother and all the other good, fluffy stuff that's in there. But then the conclusions and the lies, like Abraham took Ishmael up to the mountain to offer him as a sacrifice, and therefore God gave the promise of the land and the blessings to Ishmael and his descendants. Buzz, wrong. No, that's a lie. It's mixed in there with a lot of good. So some people say, look at all this good in here. Yeah, well, look at this blatant lie mixed in with it. So it spoils the whole thing. A little leaven spoils the whole lump. You put some bad bacteria in something you're cooking, you just ruined the whole meal. So that's what you got with things like that. All right, we've got a telecast by God's End-Time Apostle. Did we finish what we were saying about verse 8? It's a very interesting verse. I don't have it on our Bible display slides tonight. I'm just kind of talking about it off the cuff, but let's just go through what's in that verse in an informal way real quickly and then go to Mr. Armstrong. That verse says, the beast that was and is not and yet is. Now, it was, and with the correct understanding, you understand it was active. It was alive and active. When? Between 554 and 1814 AD, it was active. It was active in a continuous state for 1,260 prophetic years. Just do the math on it. Do the arithmetic. 1814 minus 514, 1,260 years. That's a prophetic number. It's not my purpose to go through the details of that tonight, but some of you who know it, this is just a little refreshment for you. Those of you who don't know it, hopefully we whet your appetite and you say, hey, I want to read and study more about that or hear more about that, and we'll tell you more about it, but at another time. So you got the beast that was active for over 1,000 years between 554 and 1814 AD. Ended when Napoleon lost the Battle of 1813 that started in 1813 and was called the Battle of 1813, but that didn't end with Napoleon losing it until the spring of 1814. So there you've got your 554, 1814, you got your 1,260 years. The 5 dynasties, or 5 of the 7 kings, verse 10 of Revelation 17 says there are 7 kings. And it says 5 of those 7 kings are fallen. Now, at the time the Apostle John wrote that in 90 A.D., none of the 7 had even been born yet, including none of the 5 that are fallen, as Apostle John said. They hadn't even been born yet in 90 A.D. when the Apostle Paul wrote that. But I'm sorry, not Apostle Paul, as I said a moment ago correctly, Apostle John. And he said there are 7 of them. None have been born. He said 5 are fallen. Now, many religious students know the 5 that are fallen are who? If you're watching on Facebook and you want to pop it down there, if you can rattle them off real quick. The first one was Justinian. Why? Why 554? Because in that year, Justinian yielded to the Vatican and the Catholic Church and the Pope's rule and submitted to the Catholics, and the Catholics, they crowned Justinian as the emperor of what then became the Holy Roman Empire. Imperial form of government means you've got a religious leader appointing your government leader. In the United States, we keep that separate. We've got separation of church and state, and for that reason, not for the reason of smushing or smashing or holding down religion. In fact, it should be the other way. Religion should have a free hand as long as it's not committing crimes. And then the state's not supposed to touch it, And to some degree, we have laws protecting that. Sometimes those laws are violated. People have to turn to the courts and fight the government, as we did in 1979, 1980 with the Church of God and the state of California. And thankfully, God caused it to work out, so we were able to settle that in the church's favor. And that not only affected this church, but many other churches. Some of you don't know how much good the Church of God, Philadelphia era, that many of us have been a part of, they're now scattered and divided. You don't know how much good we've done your church organizations by our fight against government takeover of what a government can do against a church or not do. But let's go back to those 7 kings. 5 are fallen. Many religious students know those 5 that are fallen are Justinian through Napoleon. Justinian, Charlemagne, Otto the Great, Charles V was the 4th, and Napoleon was the 5th. He did a comeback effort in 1815 with the Battle of Waterloo, but he didn't win that. He lost that badly, as many of you know. And so that battle is just moot. It doesn't extend the reign of the Holy Roman Empire out to 1815, the year of the Battle of Waterloo. No. Napoleon lost the empire the year before, and his comeback effort was not successful. So his losing the empire, the Holy Roman Empire in 1814, that's the ending date. And so what happened? That verse 8 of Revelation 17 then is saying this: the beast that was active between 554 and 1814 AD, and is not totally wiped out, killed, murdered, the end of it, but is not temporarily, while it's in the abyss, in the bottomless pit, healing, reviving, being made ready to ascend, as the rest of the verse 8 says, and shall ascend out of the abyss. And this is what Mrs. Merkel was aware of when she shouted out, "You people better look into the abyss." She knew that beast is in there ready to ascend once again. Now, oftentimes prophecy is dual. And the duality of prophecy, the first part of it is usually just a kind of a forerunner. It's kind of a type of what's going to come in full measure later. And its forerunner type came with Mussolini, and God revealed that fact through making Mr. Armstrong aware of it through newspaper articles almost on the back page, reporting how Mussolini had received a concordant from the Vatican. Hitler didn't have such a thing, but Mussolini did. He had a writing from the Vatican. They call it a concordant, but that just means a writing. authorizing him to revive this Holy Roman Empire. He went in authorizing him to go into Ethiopia and do his revenge. And he did. He conquered Ethiopia and came out proclaiming that he had become the new Il Duce, the new Julius Caesar, and that he had revived the Holy Roman Empire. Holy because of that concordant, that writing from the Vatican to him, and Roman Empire because there he is, head of Italy, center of Rome, Roman Empire, Rome, and that he had conquered the world with the conquering of Ethiopia, and he had revived the Holy Roman Empire. Well, Hitler sparked right on that and synced up with Mussolini. Mussolini, hey, you're a cool guy, Mussolini. You're my guy, Hitler would say. And he was the sixth king, which Revelation 17, verse 10 calls the one is. That verse says there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and one is. Very peculiar prophecy, written in 90 AD for a time when those 7 kings hadn't even been born yet. And here the Apostle John is saying that 5 are fallen and one is. None of them born yet, and one is. Well, that future perfect, present tense perfect, just plain perfect tense grammar became plain perfect tense in 1935 through 1945, and God's end-time apostle we were just 2 years into the Philadelphia era of the church, with Mr. Armstrong having begun a radio broadcast in the year before, 1934, and had expanded it to be coast to coast and on a coast-to-coast broadcast. Mr. Armstrong was able to announce that one is in Revelation 17, verse 10, is Mussolini. Now, Daniel, we go way back to Daniel. These guys would have given their arm or legs or whatever to have known. God, tell me what these things were writing about, what they mean. The Apostle John, same way. God said, go your way, Daniel, go your way, John. These things are closed. Put the seals on the book of Revelation, John. Seal up that book of Daniel, because these prophecies are closed until the time of the end. The time we are in today, the time began with the work that God was doing through his end time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. Now, some of you may be saying, I never heard of this man. Well, you're going to hear about him if you stay tuned here. And God has preserved his publications, his broadcast, radio and television, even his Bible studies and sermons. And we're going to have one in just a moment from him from 1984. That's very relative to what happened this week. But let's go to verse 8. We mentioned there are 7 kings. One is. Well, the one was only between 35 and 45 of the 20th century, 1935 to 1945. The fall of 1935 to the spring of 1945. April 28, 1945, boom, Mussolini was killed. Shot in the belly, hung upside down from the canopy of an Esso gasoline station in Italy. That ended the 6th king. The one is no more. So now the beast that was from 554 to 1814, then took a nap in the abyss, ascended out of the abyss between 1935 and 1945. So he was between 1935 and 1945, in addition to being was between 554 AD and 1814 AD. Okay, 1945 is come and gone, so that beast is back into that abyss that German Chancellor Angela Merkel said, you people better look into the abyss. She knows there's a beast in there sleeping, reviving. You know, you heal as you sleep. That beast is being healed, being made ready to be revived and to ascend out of that abyss. And this time the duality of the prophecy is the full fulfillment that says that beast shall go into perdition and wreak all kind of evil and harm upon this earth. And God says, be warned, and be watching, and be praying, so that you who do that can be accounted worthy to escape it. If you're called to a spring harvest and you keep His commandments, which you have to have God's Spirit to do, you're still going to goof up some. We have some grace mixed in there with law-keeping. You don't earn it, thankfully, by law-keeping. We'd all have blown it 50,000 times over. But God in His great mercy says you can be accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man. Luke 21, verse 36. I think I do have that on the screen over here. I'm going to pull it forward for just a moment before we go to Mr. Armstrong Live, because this is an important verse. We all, especially with the times as serious as they are right now, brethren, with what just happened in Israel that could re-explode, because we didn't knock out. Israel did not knock out, quote unquote, thanks to the United States administration of Joe Biden, urging them to cease fire. Don't knock out all their stuff. Why? You want to still be buddy-buddy with Iran. You still want the Hamas people to be able to knock Israel off the map. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a whole lot. So that situation is left in a situation where it can be very easily and quickly rekindled. You know, if you don't knock them out completely, they'll just repair the damage and replenish it and rebuild it all too easily, because you didn't knock out everything and really knock their socks off. Am I sounding carnal? Well, yeah. Okay, but, you know, God does fight battles for His people. But if you have another nation come along and stop them from finishing the fight the way it should be finished off, you leave the whole situation ripe to reoccur. So that thing is left to be a potential re-explosion. And worse than that, now that that's in a cease for the moment, worse and more significant than that is the situation where Russia is flexing its muscle with Ukraine and the situation there and all those troops they've positioned there and all the nuclear bombs they have made more powerful and more ready to go than ever. We're in, like the representative from California, I saw her on television the other night, just really, she spoke very well. The news host commented on how well she was speaking as she spoke with alarm about the potential of what Russia is doing that could unite a nuclear war. Okay, but like I said, I'm going to try to find the tape for tomorrow where Mr. Armstrong speaks about Russia in prophecy. Tonight, leading up to that, we're going to hear from him on the United States and the United Kingdom, British Commonwealth, United Kingdom in prophecy. Let me remove this lower third out of the way for a moment. Let's take a quick look at this verse I put here beside me so you can see it easy. Verse 36 of Luke 21. Very encouraging verse for us, brethren, at the time when we're in the middle of a couple of crises, one that could re-explode and the other that's just beginning to become a monster. God says, now he says therefore in this verse, because in the previous verse, in Luke 21, he's been explaining the seals of Revelation in plain language. And when he gets in between the first four active seals and the fifth seal, he explains that this fifth seal, which God's end-time apostle Herbert has explained as being the next major event in prophecy, will be the opening of the fifth seal, that will be the commencement of the Great Tribulation. That is the fifth seal. And in between the first four seals that are active, they are open and active, very active, happening. In between his Christ plain language explanation of the four active seals that we should be watching, he explained the fifth seal that will come after the four active seals, like a thief coming in the night, and being the great tribulation, a time of trouble so great that none before it, since the beginning of the world and the creation of man. or the hereafter, after it. None before it or after it's ever going to be as bad as what is coming in this, what the Bible calls great tribulation. And that's why, and he says it comes like a thief in the night. He says, as a snare shall that great tribulation that he's just explained in plain language in the previous verses of Luke 21, it comes on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. In other words, everybody in the world, like Reuben would say, modern-day French people, tout le monde. It comes on tout le monde, the whole world, all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. It comes as a snare, meaning like you get caught in a trap, like a mouse getting caught in a mouse trap. It didn't know that trap was there. It didn't know it was going to have that thing spring on it when it took the cheese. And God says to the rest of the world, that's the way this great tribulation is going to come on all that dwell on the face of the whole earth, everybody in the world. It's going to come like a snare, totally unexpectedly. That's why he says, those of you who are called to understand, you should therefore, let me go the correct way, in the next verse, verse 36, therefore, because this thing's coming like a snare, watch. Watch what? Watch the four active, he's just been explaining the seals in plain language. Watch the seals. Only 4 of them are active, that's all you can watch. They lead up to the 5th seal opening up, so you can see things being laid in order for that 5th seal, the resurrection, this fulfillment of verse 8 of Revelation 17, that beast ascending out of the abyss, and commencing round 3 of World War as the Great Tribulation kicks off with the opening of that 5th seal. So God says, watch, so you can see this coming, and pray always without ceasing about the people affected by these violent 4 seals. False religion, the first seal, white horse. The second seal displayed by a red horse, war, rumors of war, world war, and the uniting of Europe. The third seal depicted by a black horse, scarcity of food, famine, limus. And then the fourth seal, depicted by a pale horse with a rider on that horse named Death, alongside whom Hades, the grave, rides. And Jesus Christ explaining in language how that pale horse of death is death by several things, primarily loimus. It's limus in the seal 3, meaning scarcity of food in the Greek. Loimus in the Greek meaning disease epidemic, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. But that's not all Christ said the death would be by. In Matthew 24, here in Luke 21, Christ is saying it will come by seismus. Seismus meaning seismic activity, including commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, typhoons, tornadoes, hurricanes, commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes, which that's the only thing of these seismic activity things that the King James Version references. But if you look up the original Greek word, it includes commotion on the ground such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and tidal waves and tsunamis and wildfires and floods, any kind of seismic activity, and death by wild animals, and death by, only mentioned in Mark 13, verse 8, terake, general trouble, mob, sedition, and death by those things, and just general beginning of sorrow type trouble, but not your great trouble, not the great tribulation of the 5th seal that comes after these things are stirred up and become so frequent and impactive that you say, these seals have happened. They are happening. They are full, like the full blossom of a little bud on a tender tree limb that blooms out. Then you know summer is nigh. Christ said, then you know the kingdom of God is near, meaning the 5th seal that starts a 3.5-year countdown to when Christ returns on the 7th trump of the 7th seal is about to open. Brethren, we are in serious times, not to be scoffed at or made light of, or not to be out having overly fun. Now, you keep your balance. I missed the big band rehearsal last night. You fellows thought I was going. I loaded up my equipment. Was even going to use my professional mics to record the rehearsal last night, but my car broke down on the way. I had a flat. My power steering went out. I had to go fix the tire, get some new power steering fluid. I got some of that stop leak stuff. I hope that stops it. And then come back home, which worked out okay. I probably needed the extra sleep, and I was wanting to figure out how to get some new things. Do I have time to tell you? No, I have to tell you in the morning. We're working on something. I can just tell you briefly. I'm working on some new software so that if we get cut off on these social media places, we won't have to depend on them. We'll come on them and keep what we say on there light, and then say, we'll tell you the full story when you come over to our webpage. When you come to our webpage, we're going to have a new system on there so that some of the things, to be able to show you some things I cannot show you now because of licensing, I will be able to show you as long as I can tell them how many people viewed and from what zip codes and that kind of thing. So, and we have to have a way to prove it. So what you'll do, and you have total control of it, with this new software we'll be hopefully putting on this coming week, you register with your email address, and anytime you want to take yourself off, you control it. We don't put you in there. You put yourself in. And when you want to take yourself out, you take yourself out. And we're not going to misuse it by sending you email after email or trying to sell you stuff with it. We don't do that. We may advise you. It may set up automatically. You may be able to have some control over this, too, as to whether it tells you ahead of time that, hey, in an hour from now we're going to sign on, or next week we're going to show this. You get a simple little email so you can be aware of it and have notice about an email sent out about an hour before. I don't know if we'll utilize those things or not, but we may have those kind of potential. So you register, and that can let you know we're going to be live. It can let you into the private broadcast we'll be able to do, so that only those who are registered with a valid email, well, of course, you can create a phony one that you can get to, of course, but if you do that, that's on you. We can at least report it the way we're giving it, honestly report it, say, to the best of our knowledge, we know these are valid, and then I can have the licensing to show you stuff I can't now show you, and talk about stuff that I probably can't fully talk about without the threat of being censored, in spite of freedom of speech. But, privacy laws allow people, if you own something, if you own Facebook, if you own YouTube, you have a certain amount of right to be able to say who can use it and under what terms and conditions. And so, and we have to honor that. And we will honor that. And we're going to open up something where we don't have to worry about what we say. And where those of you that want to tune in on it and be part of it can. And if something happens, we do get cut off, we still have a way to send you a note and say, hey, we're over here. We had to move over here. We're over here. Anyway, I'll tell you more about that as we get it up. You probably should send me an email and let me know you're interested in that, because if we set that up this week, well, we'll still have to come on here and tell you, go there and say you want to be able to tune in that way. All right, I'll tell you more about it once we actually have it set up. But I need to go to Mr. Armstrong right now so that we end on time tonight. All right, so let's switch over to this other screen that has where Mr. Armstrong will be showing. Be right here. And this is the calendar where we are today. And I mentioned already, and it's on our lower third, that on the Roman calendar today's the 22nd of May until midnight on the Roman calendar. It's already, if it's after sunset where you are, it is already the 11th day of the third month, the Sabbath. It'll still be the 11th day of the third month on God's calendar in the morning, when we do the morning service to the U.S., the afternoon service to the U.K. And we'll have to talk tomorrow about how these things about when Passover can start relate to how people are miscounting Pentecost this week. Some people keeping Pentecost this coming Sunday. All because the Passover this year fell on the Sabbath. I'm waiting to hear their answer, but my guess is that because it wasn't technically the day of unleavened bread yet on the Sabbath, they said, oh, we got to be sure that the weekly Sabbath is inside the day of unleavened bread, not realizing the much more major mistake, if it were a mistake, to have the weekly Sabbath outside days of unleavened bread, but there's nothing in the Bible that says it has to be inside those days. It can be on the Sabbath day, as God's end-time apostle very carefully determined, because of having had two corrections by God, one in 1940 to correct us from counting from the annual Sabbath to begin counting from the weekly Sabbath, and then because of the mistranslation, the misrendering of a verse in Leviticus 23, verses 15 and 16, saying count English grammar from, meaning exclude the wave sheaf day, when the Hebrew grammar says include the wave sheaf day. So to not be in transliteration misorder or conflict, Mr. Armstrong was corrected by God in 1974 to check with Hebrew scholars and find out, oh, the original Hebrew grammar says wave sheaf day has to be included in the Pentecost count. So we made that correction. And what does have to be inside of the days of unleavened bread is the wave sheaf day. And those that are keeping Pentecost Sunday, this Sunday, they've got the wave sheaf day, even the way they're counting and figuring it, they've got it. They've got the wave sheaf day that begins the count outside of the days of unleavened bread. It's the wave sheaf day that has to be inside the days of unleavened bread, not the weekly Sabbath that triggers the wave sheaf day, the following day, or that triggers the count beginning the following day on the wave sheaf day through 49 days of 7 weeks, and then the morrow after that seventh Sabbath, day 50, being the day of Pentecost after the 7 weeks of Sunday through Saturday, first day through Sabbath day weeks are complete. After 7 Sabbaths, 7 weeks are complete. Then the morrow after that 7th Sabbath, you number 50 and keep the holy day on it. The Pentecost holy day on it. All right, okay, so I just wanted to touch on that. We've got to go right to Mr. Armstrong. I wanted to cover, so we'll do this tomorrow. We'll do this, not tomorrow, we'll do this in the morning, on the Sabbath in the morning. We'll go through these numbers and compare it to what the people that are keeping Pentecost Sunday are doing. Although it's kind of tragic. I was out hoping we could be outside of having to thrash through how to count Pentecost with people still keeping it on Monday. Now we got some people still keeping it a week late. Yeah, okay. You got to be careful how you talk to them, though. All right, so I missed the rehearsal. I am using the rehearsal. Our broadcasting audio mixer went bad, so I'm using the big band's audio mixer. I'm only using 2 pots on it right now, but you know, the mic and the play the video thing on it. But at least we're still alive here. Let's go. Mr. Armstrong, sir, if you're ready, we are definitely ready to hear your talk tonight from 1984, God's end-time apostle speaking on the United States and the United Kingdom in prophecy. And we'll extend it tomorrow into how it relates to Russia in prophecy. But let's go now for this talk, very good talk tonight, God's end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. We got him coming right up. I gotta find the button. I closed that screenshot, so let me find where the button is. While we're waiting on Mr. Armstrong, hopefully your appetite is wet and ready to hear from him. Here he is, God's end-time apostle, Herbert W. Armstrong.
A series called Roots was viewed by millions. Later on, it was rerun and viewed by more millions. It traced the origin of one black family, or their roots, back for a couple hundred years or so into Africa. Now the Jews know their roots. It's traced through the Bible, all the way back to the very first created man, Adam, and their mother, Eve. Also, the Arabs know that almost every Arab knows he is descended from Ishmael, and Ishmael was a son of Abraham mentioned in the Bible, and through that they have their roots all the way back to the first created man, Adam. Also, the Turkish people are generally known to be descended from Esau. They have their roots in Esau, and Esau is mentioned in the Bible, and you have his genealogy all the way back to the first created man, Adam. But where are our roots? Where are the roots of the American people, the Canadians, the English, and the people of northwestern Europe, even of Germany? Why is our identity lost? Why is it we do not know where we are? Our identity is lost while other people can trace their ancestry and their roots all the way back. Well, I'm going to give you the answer. Because our roots can be traced, and we can come to know who we are, and I'm prepared to reveal that truth to you. Now, the Jews are pretty well recognized for who they are because of their recognition and continued recognition of the seventh-day Sabbath. It's known in so many quarters even as the Jewish Sabbath. Did you know that the first place in all of the Bible where the word Jews is mentioned is in the Bible in 2 Kings 16, verses 5 and 6. That's 2 Kings 16, verses 5 and 6. If you go back to some of the roots of Israel, and the first place where the name Jew is mentioned is in this particular scripture. I'll quote it. Then Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, came to Jerusalem to war. And they besieged Ahaz, who was the king in Jerusalem, but they could not overcome him. At that time, Rezin, the king of Syria, now allied with Israel, recovered Elath to Syria and drave the Jews from Elath. Now there's the first place the Jews are mentioned, and they're at war with the ally of Israel. Israel is there allied with Syria. And Israel's ally drove the Jews from Elath. And the Syrians came to Elath and dwelt there unto this day, as you read in 2 Kings 16:6. The first place where Jews are mentioned, they were at war against Israel. Now, can you imagine that? The Jews at war against Israel. Why, doesn't everybody think that the Jews are Israel? But the truth is, they are not. The Jews are not Israel at all. And it's time we get some of these identities straightened out. After King Solomon of Israel died, his son Rehoboam came to the throne. Solomon had taxed the people very greatly. As a matter of fact, he had overtaxed them. And he was living in greater and more gorgeous splendor than any king ever had. The people of Israel sent their representative to King Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, who now was the king, and they said to him, "If you will lighten our taxes and not put this burden on us like your father Solomon did, we will serve you. But if you do not, and if you're going to continue to tax us, we are going to reject you as our king. You will not be our king any longer." Rehoboam consulted the old men, and they advised him to give in and bring down the taxes. Then he consulted the young men, and they said, "Oh, tell them where to go to." And so he said to them, "My father laid the taxes on you, but I'm going to make it a whole lot worse. I'm going to lay heavier taxes on you." And then Israel rejected him as king. And they took the man who had been, well, today we would call him the prime minister under Solomon. His name was Jeroboam. And they made him the king. And they set up the capital in Samaria, the city of Samaria, north of Jerusalem, some several miles north of Jerusalem. And they rejected Rehoboam as king. At that time, the tribe of Judah seceded from Israel and became the kingdom of Judah. They took a new name. They became known as the kingdom of Judah. Now the tribe of Benjamin went with them because they were located, adjoining them in territory anyway. And the first thing that the new king Jeroboam did was to change the seventh month festivals of Israel, which was the Feast of Tabernacles, to the 8th month. And also he changed the 7th day of the week, or the Sabbath day, from the 7th day to the 8th day, which was Sunday, or the first day of the week, the beginning of another week. And so a great division was made. Now, the next thing that King Jeroboam did was to put away all of the Levites, who were the priestly tribe. They were the better educated people. They were the most highly educated, the most affluent people in Israel, but he put them away because he was afraid they would lead the people back to King Rehoboam, and Jeroboam would lose out on his throne. And so the tribe of Levi joined with Judah also, and the three tribes of Judah, Benjamin and Levi, became known as the kingdom of Judah. They were not Israel. They were now the kingdom of Judah. Now for the time of 19 different kings and 7 dynasties, the kings of Israel continued to rebel against their God, the Creator. And finally, God had warned them that he would drive them out, and finally he did. And now we trace the history of what happened in 2 Kings, the 17th chapter, beginning with verse 5. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went to Samaria, Israel's capital and Israel's land. The whole land was called Samaria by that time, and besieged it 3 years. That's from 721 to 718 BC. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Israel, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel, no, not the Jews, carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan. Well, this was in the southern shores, near the general area, the southern shores of the Caspian Sea, and in the cities of the Medes. Therefore, the Lord, or the Eternal, was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only, or the kingdom of Judah. They were left with a capital in Jerusalem, and that was all of Israel that was left in Palestine, in that land, the original so-called Holy Land. Now continuing in verse 23, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all the servants, the prophets, so was Israel, now not the Jews, but Israel, carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. That is the day that this was written. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cutha, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria, instead of the children of Israel. In other words, the people called Israel had been moved out of their land. Now they had dwelt in the land called Samaria, and only the kingdom of Judah remained in Judea, or the land surrounding Jerusalem. But Samaria was in northern Palestine, and they were all moved from their farms, from their cities, from their homes, over to the southern shores of the Caspian Sea, and placed them, that is, these Gentiles from Babylon and other cities over there, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. Now, they were the ones that were called Samaritans in the time of Christ. Now, the Jews in the time of Christ were from the kingdom of Judah. And they are the ones that Christ came to, his own. Christ himself was of the tribe of Judah, and he came to his own, who received him not. So, the nation Israel finally lost its identity. It was driven out away from God. They lost their identity and became known as the lost 10 tribes. God, meantime, had made an everlasting covenant with Israel. It's recorded back in Exodus 31. He had made a covenant with them that was for all eternity. An everlasting covenant with all Israel. This was long before the division between Israel and Judah. This goes clear back into the days of Moses. Now I want to read you that covenant. And it is in Exodus 31, and I'll begin here with verse 13, where God said to Moses, "Speak also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths you shall keep. For it," that is the Sabbath, "is a sign between me," that is God, "and the children of Israel throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you," or that I am the Lord that sets you apart from other nations. Sanctify means set apart. "Wherefore," the scripture continues, "the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant." So it was a covenant, it was perpetual, never to end. Now, incidentally, let me mention this is a covenant, and it is no part of the Old Covenant. It was made after the Old Covenant had been, well, we might say signed, sealed, and ratified, and ratified by blood, as you read back in the 23rd, 24th chapters of Exodus. And this is in Exodus 31. Now, verse 17, "It is a sign between me," that is God, "and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord," or the Eternal, "made heaven and earth, and in the 7th day he rested and was refreshed." Now, a sign is an identifying mark. A retail merchant hangs a sign out in front of his store. Oh, it might say Jones and Company Furniture. It tells and identifies who owns it. Jones owns it, Jones and Company. And what is it? It's a furniture store. Or it might say drugs or whatever. And so it was made an everlasting covenant. It was no part of the old covenant, which was abolished at the cross. It was a separate covenant that was eternal, and as a matter of fact continues on today, if you know who Israel is. Now, the main nation, Israel, had lost its identity, and the Jewish people from the tribe of Judah, Benjamin and Levi only remained. They were all that remained in the land of Palestine. Later, they were taken away to Babylon, and even after that, then a certain colony was sent back to Jerusalem 70 years later to rebuild the temple, which had been destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon about 585 BC. But the nation of Judah retained their identity. because they retained the seventh-day Sabbath, which was the sign that identified them. It identified God because in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth and rested. It identified him because creation is the proof of God, and creation identifies God and who God is. And so it identified God to them. It identified them not only to God, but to the world. Now, the Jews kept their Sabbath sign, and they today suppose that they are Israel because they keep the Sabbath. And yet they are only Judah and not Israel. And Israel was driven out and became lost. Now, they lost the Sabbath. They did not keep it. They had turned to the eighth day, or which became, of course, the first day of the next week, or Sunday. Now, after 718 B.C., lost Israel and Assyria moved west and northwest. They moved from the southern shores of the Caspian Sea, and by the time Judah was taken to Babylon, they had already moved, and now they had moved north and northwest. Now, the Assyrians had settled in the land that we call Germany today. And the Germans of today have their roots back in ancient Assyria. They don't know that, and they don't know who they are. The 10 tribes moved on into Western Europe and into the British Isles. And it's pretty well identified today that especially the northern French, the French people, are the descendants of the tribe of Reuben. That the British were the descendants of Joseph. And Joseph was really divided into two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now the British were quite a colonizing nation. They colonized all over the world, and that's a matter of history that gets down to our time. It's just recently that Britain has lost so many of her colonies. But she did possess India, she possessed most of Africa, she possessed countries all over the world. And she finally grew rich in that way. She was a colonizing people, and the Bible says she was to lose her first colony. The first colony of England migrated to the United States and are identified, if you will study it closely and with many, many texts and passages in different places in the Bible, as the descendants of the tribe of Manasseh, one of the 12 tribes of ancient Israel, and part of the 10 lost tribes that lost their identity and don't even know that they are Israel, and think they're Gentiles, and the world thinks so, and the world doesn't know what are their roots or where they came from, because they became lost. They lost their language. Now we find today they're speaking the English language. Of course, the English language didn't exist back 700 years before Christ. And the Assyrians had settled in Germany. All of that is a remarkable thing in giving us the roots or the history of our own people, where we came from, who we are, and we can trace our identity all the way, just like other nations can, back to the first created human being, Adam, and his wife God made from him, for him, called Eve. And all humanity has come from them. And we can have our identity back that far. Now, I have written a book which through many years now has gone out to, well, I was going to say millions of people. I don't just recall how many million. I don't think we've kept a record of the exact number. But this booklet, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, millions of people have read it. It's the most circulated booklet we have ever put out. I haven't announced it now for some little time on this program, And I want to announce it once again, and that will give you some startling information about our ancestry, about your own roots, where you came from. And not only that, it will give you, it is the key to understanding biblical prophecy, and it shows you what Bible prophecy says is going to happen to the United States in the next few years. Now you wonder, where are we going from here? The world is in trouble. And the United States is approaching trouble, many troubles. And it's all written in the Bible, and you can't understand it without this knowledge of our identity, of our own roots, who we are, where we came from, and where we're going. The booklet is the United States and Britain in Prophecy. Now, there's no charge. All you have to do is request it. It's an illustrated book. It's a good many pages, and it will not only identify you and give you the key to understanding all prophecies, but it specifically pinpoints the United States and where we are mentioned as nations, the British and the American people, in biblical prophecy, and what is going to happen in the next few years. What already has happened in Britain is recorded there incidentally. Now, at the same time, I want to send you another booklet along with it. Where is the true church today? I've said something about that in recent programs. The true church of God has had great difficulty. It has been a persecuted church, and great false churches have risen up. But Jesus Christ said that the gates of the grave would never prevail against his church, and it does still exist today. Where is it? This booklet will tell you that. Herbert W. Armstrong. Goodbye, friends.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, and thank you to those of you who are tuned in tonight for this Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study for the 11th day of the third month, the 22nd day of May, 2021. In the morning, we'll have Mr. Armstrong back to talk about Russia in prophecy. Mr. Armstrong mentioned at the close of this telecast tonight from 1984. You saw the label at the top. It was from June of 1984. He offered the booklet, Where is God's True Church? Where is the True Church? Well, from the time he wrote that to today, it has certainly done what he said at the end of the program. It's gone through many persecutions. It's gone through one even from within, which winds up being called not just a great falling away, but a great apostasy that has led to a scattering of the church, and unfortunately within the scattering, much division. We're out of time. I can't talk more about that tonight, but I'll invite you to join us again in the morning for the AM service to the U.S., the PM service to the U.K. I did mention that I would put this chart up. We'll put the whole chart up fully in the morning and go through a little bit of Genesis 49 about where are the 12 tribes today. We can tell you where they are. Now, where's God's true church? We'll talk about that in the morning, too, when we'll talk about where it is, what's happened to it, where it is right now today, and a little bit about where it should be. Hope you'll join us in the morning here on cogtv.org. And I was going to mention, too, Mr. Armstrong offered the booklet tonight on the United States and Britain in prophecy. We have that in 2 or 3 forms for you. One, we have chapter by chapter, the booklet, which you can find by going to our library page on cogtv.org. On the far right side of the home page, there'll be the menu buttons are on the right side of our home page, and just look down a little ways from the top. They're kind of in alphabetical order. You got archive, video, and calendar, and then down below that, where you'd have an L, is library. If you punch the library page, you can find that book online for you, page by page, all of the United States and British Commonwealth, the U.S. and the U.K. in prophecy. And we also have it in about 2 months' worth of video broadcast for you. Friday night Bible studies, Sabbaths. A couple of years ago, we read through the entire book week by week we'd go through a chapter, and it took 10 or 12 weeks to get through those 12 chapters of the book. And that video is online. If you go to our homepage and just go down on the right-hand column where the menu items are, just go down to where you find the menu item that says archive video, and then just look on the Sabbath service side, scroll down until you find the United States and British Commonwealth and Prophecy, Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4. And if you want to have it read to you, we read it to you, put the text scrolling across the screen as we read it. And so that's there from our homepage on the archive video section for you. Brethren, that's it for tonight. We've got to sign on out. So until the morning, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreath, wishing everybody very happy Sabbath, good night's sleep, Shabbat Shalom. Until the morning.